Hello and welcome to Our Prenup Lawyer Podcast, where you and I get to learn more about prenups as I interview professionals in the fields of family law, couples counseling, and wealth management. I'm your host, Libby Garabedian, and let's get started. Today we have Scott Levin, a family law attorney, certified divorce financial analyst, and founder of the Chief PeaceKeeper Mediation Method, dedicated to helping California families navigate divorce outside of court with compassion and clarity. With over 20 years of experience in finance and litigation, he combines legal expertise with emotional intelligence to reduce conflict, ease anxiety, and prioritize children's wealth. Hi, Scott. Thank you for being on the episode today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Of course. So let's first start with, what's Chief PeaceKeeper? That's trademarked, right?
Yeah. Basically, it just signifies kind of what I'm about in terms of the divorce world. I had clients that were members of one of the tribal councils here in Southern California about 10 years ago. And when they were signing their divorce papers, so I work with both sides to a divorce. And then I work as a neutral and impartial, and I do all of the legal process for them. So when we were signing our settlement agreement, the mom in this case looked at me and she said, "You're my chief peacekeeper." And I said, "Oh, can I steal that from you?" But yeah, basically it's just kind of signifies, in terms of the divorced world, there's a way to do it where you can be peaceful, you can be amicable, you can be collaborative, and you can avoid a court battle.
Right. So how do you go about that in your own practice, keeping it amicable?
I mean, yeah, it varies in a lot of cases, but I mean, it's about collaboration. So in divorce, when you're mediating a divorce settlement, you're really forming a team with the couple. So a couple and they are on team us, and we collaborate on finding solutions to the issues of divorce. So on our side of the court are, the human beings. On the other side of the court are the problems that we have to figure out. So we are not spending time defeating each other or hurting each other or trying to defeat the other side. We're trying to defeat the issues of the process. And so I just set it up in that way, basically, where it's all about creative solution, problem solving, idea generation, whiteboarding. What are the ways that we can solve this issue? My job is to let them know all the ways that I'm aware of after 2 decades plus of being in this world. And so when people have conflict, they're usually putting forward, one idea each. I would like it this way. I would like it that way. And those ideas are not, 2 things can't happen at the same time. So, one of the things I do is say, hey, what about options 3 through 10? Or what if we took this part of that idea and this part of this idea and meld them together? So, I'm a creative thinker. I'm an outside the box thinker. That's kind of what I specialize in.
So how did you get into mediation?
I don't know. I've been in finance and I've been involved in the startup world in my past life. So I have a finance background, and I was litigating cases for about 10 years in court as a lawyer that would represent one side versus the other. In 2013, one of my kids was born, and I just decided that I was going to take a stand for humanity and not litigate anymore. So, since 2013, I haven't litigated a case representing one person versus the other as an attorney in court. It's a challenging place in the law because it's really easy to tell, a client, like, this is what you deserve, or this is what you should get, or this is what we should tell the judge. From their perspective only. It's harder to put a puzzle together to make both sides feel as whole as possible and willing to sign a settlement, which they're not, oftentimes neither of them are ecstatic about. So it's really much more nuanced, and it takes a a much more critical, it takes a lot of critical thinking and evaluation and strategizing more so than just, let's go get them.
Yeah. How do you feel that you've had to adapt to go from litigation to this, where you're trying to bring people together?
It's a totally different mindset, that teamwork, that collaboration. I tell people that, there's a big movement in family law where almost every family law litigator now is mediating cases on the side. Everyone has a mediation tab on their website. Even if they have never mediated, they're putting it out there, right? I believe that mediation is a special skill set. When I was litigating cases and I was like waking up to emergency hearings and all the stuff that happens when you're litigating, it puts you in a mindset that's very, us versus the world. And so it's hard to turn that mindset off, that battle helmet, for your 2 p.m. appointment where husband and wife or wife and wife or whoever, a mediation couple is coming in to see you for an hour, and then you go back to defeating the other side, and in all your cases are all about wins and losses. Mediation's a mindset. It's a specialty. And I really think people should be choosing one lane or the other, either litigate cases and go on that route, or mediate cases and stay in that world. But, I think professionals should really choose a lane.
Yeah, it's not really a transferable skill set, it's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I just think it's just like family law litigation is very tough, and it's a grind. And you really feel like it's you and your clients against the other side, and that's your mindset all day long. To turn that off is almost impossible, I believe.
So in the mediation and divorce litigation processes, how, is it made more difficult or easier when you've got a prenup in place?
Yeah, first of all, like in mediation, most of the time you have to agree that the prenup's valid. Like, you can't be contesting a prenup in mediation. You can ask for, sometimes I have clients ask for like a settlement that goes beyond the prenup, and the other side is open to that. But the prenup kind of shuts down certain aspects. Like, before they hire me, they've already said, hey, we both agree that the prenup does this, this, and that. But, maybe there's some flexibility on the edges. But I'm not a judge. So if someone's coming in here, if a couple's coming in here and one's saying, I don't think the prenup is valid because X, Y, or Z, I'm not going to rule on that or really have any say. What I can do is I can help them negotiate a settlement that respects the prenup, but also, maybe gives them something that the prenup doesn't allow to one of the sides, so that we can move forward without a battle.
So when you're drafting a prenup, what's your process so that when you're looking forward into the future, that on the off chance a couple ends up getting divorced or they go through mediation, how do you make it airtight so that both sides end up being happy?
Yeah, I don't know if that's such a thing, but airtight, first of all, I won't be involved in a prenup unless both sides are represented. So it really depends on, I can mediate a prenup, which is where a couple, comes in. I work with both of them as an impartial neutral, and I craft a prenup with both of their inputs, and we basically collaborate on what we want it to say, and then I draft it, and then they get 2 attorneys to review it for each of them, and then I make some edits that their attorneys want. So I can still work as a neutral in that capacity. So that's one thing. And that works out really well because both sides are involved. Both sides understand what it says because, we've talked about everything. We've really gone over all the options together. I'm not a huge fan of the traditional, like, one side just meets with their lawyer, crafts like a one-sided prenup and hands it to the other side. Out of the blue, So the other side, the other way that I serve in the prenup realm is as an attorney. So There's basically just kind of collaborating with my client, but both sides would be represented. Both sides have to do a full disclosure. So a lot of times the client will be like, well, I have this asset, but it's really not mine. It's my grandma's. But, I say, hey, put it down. The oversharing is better than undersharing, because you don't want the other side to be able to say that they didn't know about something, or they were defrauded essentially into the prenup by a failure to disclose. So it's really important that disclosures have to be done well and accurately, and everyone has to have a chance to ask questions and poke at those disclosures and ask for more information, and both sides have to be represented. But I've never had a problem ever in 2 decades doing a mediated prenup, because both sides really do feel like they had a hand in creating the end result. But the traditional, higher earning spouse or higher net worth spouse crafting a prenup with a lawyer behind closed doors and handing it a kind of a one-sided document to the other, that's when you can have, people feeling like they don't really understand, or they're not really involved in the crafting, and that can make them feel disadvantaged in the future.
Yeah, kind of isolating one spouse and freezing them out in a way. So talking about that collaboration and mediation, how do you dispel the myth that having a prenup or coming up with a prenup is an adversarial process, and instead you get more of the couple coming together?
Yeah, I mean, in the mediation setting, the 3 of us sit down like this or on Zoom and we talk things out. So I bring up questions like, what if this were to happen? Or what if that were to happen? And I just bring up scenarios so that they can put themselves they can project forward and put themselves in those scenarios, and we can play that out. Like if this happens, then you would see, and each person kind of says, well, I think this financial decision would mean X, Y, or Z in that scenario. So basically we just if you're going to have kids, what if one of you takes a step back in your career? What does that mean to your financial outcome if you eventually divorce? How do we account for that? How can we basically set each party up so that in the event of divorce, this document isn't punitive to one or the other? And that's really the goal of a mediated prenup, is that these documents are very real and they have very real impacts, and they're not to be played with. A prenuptial agreement can have a huge impact on your life in the future. I've seen it happen to a lot of people. I've seen clients enter the divorce process with a prenup and having no idea what it really means, and having it be just tremendously impactful. So you just have to be really careful and understand what you're signing, why, and how, and have a chance to amend those things so that it doesn't harshly affect you in the future if you don't intend it for it to do so.
So going back to what you mentioned about having a higher or lesser earning spouse in the relationship, when you're representing, let's say, the lesser earning spouse, how do you counsel them so that they don't feel like their financial future is in jeopardy?
Yeah, so usually in a case like that, there's a prenup that's given to them from the other side, and it's a pretty one-sided document most of the time. And it's very expansive. So what I try to do is say, hey, let's cut this back in some ways. So, we can't edit every provision, or it's not going to fly. But what's most important to my client, what's most important to their future, and we just amend those provisions so that they have more rights, less problems later. But that's a very common scenario. Most prenups don't. I'd say more often than not, there's a kind of an advantage and disadvantage side to a traditional prenup that's written with one person and their lawyer, handed to the other person with minimal time, and you're just trying to make sure that they understand what it says and what their options are for changing what it says.
How do you equalize the marriage when you're drafting a prenup, when you have one spouse who is giving up their career to stay home with their kids?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you can't predict that because if they don't have children yet, you don't know, they don't know if they're going to, or they don't really know what that means career-wise if they do. So you just try to say, hey, if you have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old and you're getting a divorce, let's put ourselves in that position and figure out what that looks like. What this document would say right now is X, Y, and Z would happen. If that's not a result that you are comfortable with, then let's change it so that, you are comfortable with that. Or if you have a 17 and a 14 and a 9-year-old. I mean, so I just try to put them in these positions to get them thinking about those scenarios. And I help them understand what would happen according to the current document and what our options are for changing it so that those things may or may not happen.
What does child support and alimony look like when you have children born outside of the marriage versus when they're born inside of the marriage?
Can you clarify?
If you have, let's say, a couple's coming together, it might not be their first marriage, and one partner has children from a previous marriage or previous relationship, and the couple has children together once they're married, what does that look like for the financial future of each child?
I mean, I'm not sure what it means. I mean, it could mean a lot financially, but that's a common scenario. I think that prenups are most often sought by people that have been divorced previously, especially when they have a business or that they've accumulated some wealth, and they're in their 40s and 50s and 60s as opposed to their 20s and early 30s. But yeah, blended family. I mean, I'm not so sure that a lot of the prenup encompasses anything particular about those situations, as much as talking through. Again, when I'm mediating a prenup, we can talk through like issues about blending and what might come up in the future that would be potential hazards and things like that, where we can kind of game plan. But I'm not so sure it would be appropriate in the actual prenup document.
What's the difference between a prenup for a couple in their first marriage or maybe their second or third marriage?
Well, if they've gone through a really hard divorce process, that one of the big keys is that they want to have a path towards an amicable settlement if they divorce in this upcoming marriage. So it's very common for one person to say, yeah, I went through a 2.5 or 3.5 year divorce process. I just can't do that again. I need to make sure that doesn't happen. So, creating a path towards divorcing amicably or in mediation is a real key. Oftentimes people have more assets and more wealth because they're older, or because they've matured in their lives, and they have more to protect. So they have a business. They have a home. They have multiple homes. They have children that are from a previous relationship. So they have more complicated lives, and the prenup can help clarify, financial rights and entitlements in the future.
Obviously, prenups are becoming more popular among couples. What's the biggest change you've seen in the last 10 to 15 years with these types of agreements? That
people are being more collaborative. About 30% of my work in prenups are as a mediator, and I love that. It's really fun to mediate a prenup. I'm able to really, help people, like I said, talk about things that might not go in the prenup, but that I know are coming up. If they have kids from previous relationships, we can talk about those things. We also talk about what happens in the event of death while you're married. I can help them kind of get in the frame of mind to make decisions about that realm and to get set up with a trust attorney as well. So, I mean, it's just people are being more collaborative. They're wanting the documents to reflect their lives, and they're not wanting as much of the one-sided, demon prenup, which is like, you get nothing, I get everything, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. So going off that point about setting them up with a trust attorney, should couples be working on their prenups in conjunction with estate planning?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really nuanced division. People get really confused by that because it's prenup is what happens in the event of a divorce while both people are alive, and then a trust would take effect about in the event that you are married, but at the time that the first person dies. So it's really nuanced though, because people want to be taken care of in the event that they are married and one person dies, but one person owns the home according to the prenup and the trust. So, but they die, and the other person, they presumably were happily married because there's no divorce process going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so people talk about what would happen in that realm at the time of doing the prenup. It's very common for those conversations to take place, and those are healthy conversations, but they can only take place if you're mediating the prenup. I mean, it's hard for those conversations to take place if you're just talking amongst each other, and then the two attorneys are kind of leading the drafting and the negotiation, because those things aren't being brought up. So it's kind of an advantage of a mediated process.
So kind of shifting gears here, what if you have a situation, you touched upon this earlier, where you have inheritance or money from a family member, maybe the bank of mom and dad is contributing to one spouse. How is that written into the prenup?
Yeah, I mean, it's common, very common, that people are relying on their either ongoing gifts or inheritance. And it really depends. There's lots of options, but inheritance, people want to protect inheritance. But we give them a way of protecting their inheritance if they don't want it to become part of a community property. But at the same time, there's ways of basically making it really easy for them to make certain property, convert it to community property if they choose to. So the way that I like to set these prenups are basically that we're achieving the protection in advance. So all the things that they want to protect are kept separate, but giving them a path to make their own choices in the future on a case-by-case decision. So they could say, hey, I'm going to deposit this money into a joint account and intentionally convert it to a community asset. So we're giving them the mechanism to do that. But at the same time, giving them the option of protecting that property as their own.
So keeping with that idea of autonomy and helping them make or have the freedom to make different decisions about their financial future, at what point should couples who already have a prenup take a look at it, make changes to it, where in most states it becomes a postnup?
Yeah, I mean, things change, right? Over time, like your financial reality can change dramatically. When I got married, we had nothing, and we don't have a prenup, but if we did, this would be an appropriate time. My wife has a business, I have a business, we have 3 kids, we have, property, 401k, all these things that didn't necessarily exist. So when if you make a prenup and in that prenup you made financial decisions that might not reflect what your desires are at present. So you should look at it, and you should consider totally revamping it, or at least understanding what it would say, what it would mean in the event that you divorce in the future, based on those terms. So a lot of people do amend their prenups, and then obviously if there's wholesale changes, then they'll just set up a postnup.
How does the postnup process differ from the prenup process?
Well, yeah, I mean, it just depends. Postnups, there's a reason that courts view postnups, with skepticism to some degree. So, you have to be careful. I'm careful that I'm not taking on a case where it's a postnup only, to delay a divorce process by a year or two. But, you need to, a postnup really should have nothing to do with divorce. Of course, it's what will happen in the event of divorce will be in the postnup, but you're not anticipating or planning a divorce. A lot of times people will get a postnup when they come into certain property or they're about to, use money in a certain way where they want to protect that money in the event that they eventually get divorced. So they'll write a postnup before these decisions take place. Or in general, sometimes people will write a postnup because they think that if they can get some financial issue is putting pressure on the marriage, that if they can relieve that pressure, that the marriage could thrive more effectively. So, and then of course, some people are getting a postnup because one person, was unfaithful or did something to the other, one person feels wronged and they agree to some sort of financial terms that will account for that wrong and prevent, temporarily the divorce. But those are the cases where I'm really evaluating whether I want to be involved or not. I don't want one person to sign over rights to property because they cheated or did something financially that harmed the other person, because they really want to save the marriage and the other person's kind of punishing them for it. Those are the cases that I steer away from.
And thinking about those ideas of pressure and maybe there is a little unfair bargaining power, have you ever been in a position where you're acting as counsel for one spouse or soon-to-be spouse, and you've had to tell them that, no, you can't sign this prenup or you need to walk away?
Yeah, I had a case recently where it's basically my client, the two parties were quite in love, I think, my perception, but one of their family members were putting a lot of pressure on the marriage because of a family business and wanting that family business to be protected, and they just would not. And my client's spouse was not in a position to make any accommodations to anything that we asked for, and it was really the first time in my life it was a take it or leave it right from the get-go post that. And I told her that I really didn't feel comfortable and that it wasn't right, and that, there's supposed to be negotiation and back and forth, and it was just to take it or leave it. And what is leave it? Leave it is what? Divorce?
Yeah.
At two people that are happily married but have this outside family pressure on them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the only time that I really felt like the only time I felt the illy willies.
Mm-hmm. How or at what point should couples in the relationship, before they get engaged or when they're engaged, when should they start talking about a prenup? Let's say that there is that family pressure, that they have a business or their family just has a history of prenups. Oh, my older brother, my older sister, they just have prenups. That's how we do it.
You should really, I don't, when people call me and they're like, yeah, I'm getting married, what is it, July 7th today or 8th? When they're getting married July 20th and they're just starting to get lawyers, that's always really strange to me. Like, if one person knew that this was coming or thought, why is it coming up so late? Mm-hmm. That can be a strategy to put pressure on the other person to sign whatever they give them, or to only make minimal changes because there's not much time left. So you should do it, you should start the process 3 to 4 months in advance of the wedding or the marriage date. Give yourself enough time to negotiate, to understand, to sit with an agreement where you're not being pressured by, you have to sign this in the next 2 days or there's no marriage. Isn't that inherent pressure on the person? So a lot of people start the prenups either by design or by circumstance very, very late in the process, and it puts in no matter what the case is, there's implied pressure because you're either going to get married and sign this document or not.
How do courts look at that if there is divorce proceedings after when there is this implied pressure? Does it have to be a little more clear?
I'm not involved in contesting prenups anymore. I know most lawyers, friends of mine, talk about contesting prenups all the time. I mean, I think if both parties are represented from the beginning with, quality legal counsel, and there's a full disclosure of assets, and they have time to negotiate the terms, that seems like a fair setup to me. Now, the impact of what the agreement can say can be harsh, like I said before, but I mean, it's the process is fair or is set up well, then I think that's right off the bat, you're less likely to have a contested issue. But if you're not represented, or one person's not represented, or you start the negotiations, 14 days out from the marriage, those are scenarios now you have a process that's flawed.
And thinking about that, having enough time to go through the negotiation process, what other advice would you give to couples who are considering whether to get a prenup?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a really good idea in the sense that you can basically agree in advance not to litigate cases. So like if all that comes from a prenup is that you agree to mediate and that you put into place a path to mediate your divorce, and you make it harder for that not to happen, that's a really positive outcome by itself. But in terms of you could make a lot of financial agreements that would ease the divorce process. It's just that a lot of these financial agreements can also have really meaningful impacts. If your lifestyle is supported by your spouse's earnings, primarily your spouse's earnings during marriage, or their net worth, even if they're not earning income actively, and you divorce, if the prenup says all their stuff is theirs, your lifestyle is going to change dramatically. So you have to be careful about waiving spousal support. Absolutely. So most of the time, there's no reason to do that. A full waiver, you can't predict. Spousal support is a really, really key issue, and you just can't predict what that, under what circumstances you'll need it or won't need it. But to just, most of these one-sided prenups where I'm representing like the lower earning spouse or the disadvantage, almost 90% of them say there's a full waiver of spousal support when I get the document. And I just expect it to be there, and it normally is. So, I have to push back on that, and we have to come up with an agreement where there's not, a full waiver, because my client, you can't predict what will happen in the future.
What other statutory calculations or clauses are must-haves in a prenup?
I mean, if you have kids, so if you're getting married and you have a young child, but it's not your partner's child. So let's say you have a 4-year-old, but basically you're going to get married. That person's going to basically be looked at as a parental figure. And if they go through the next 20 years as that person's parent, the prenup could have provisions about, caring for that person in terms of life insurance beneficiaries or other things. And they can be very creative. So I guess, setting up, one thing about spousal support, that's the biggest thing. A lot of people want to waive, a lot of people that are drafting prenups want spousal support to be waived by both sides. You can do a waiver, and that's always iffy because you don't know if it will be enforced later. But one thing that most of my clients do, or many of my clients do, is say, hey, we're going to set up a path where there's going to be value given to the other person if they accept the prenup. So there's going to be this, chunk of value, money, and this money is yours in the event that we mediate a settlement and we don't litigate. And so you basically can set up your settlement in the event of divorce in a way that it's very likely that it won't be contested and become like the 2 or 3 year divorce. That's the main benefit of a prenup that most lawyers don't capture, is what is the process? How will these two people navigate divorce if it happens? And the prenup can really be structured to make it an amicable or collaborative process so that they avoid the drama. you.
California is an equitable distribution state, right? How does that affect prenups when you have spousal support waived?
Well, so it's community property state. So when there's spousal support, it's totally waived. So income is relevant to spousal support.
Mm-hmm.
So division of assets is basically when you get divorced, you're trying to account for what are the community assets, what are the separate assets. So you're dividing assets and debts. And then separately, if there is no prenup, then you're setting child support and spousal support based on the income and the income differentials between both sides. If there's spousal support waived, again, I don't contest cases as an attorney anymore. So when there's spousal support waived, and most of my clients are acknowledging that they agree to that, and then they can mediate the settlement. If they disagree that spousal support is waived by the prenup being invalid, if they want to pursue it, like to invalidate a prenup, but not going to be mediating a settlement.
Now, from all the ugly divorces we've seen, but also the amicable mediations and successful marriages, what is something that you've noticed that leads to a happy couple in the end?
I think it's really important that couples form community. So, I'd say 90% of the couples I see, we never mixed our assets. I have no idea what he makes or she makes. Like, you have to be willing to form community. Something about keeping your money separate, like, weighs on a marriage over time. And I don't know why that is, but you have to form community property. You have to be willing to, you got to jump in it and put something in together, because so many of my clients that are divorcing are tell me that they never joined their property in any way. They each had separate accounts, and they both transferred money into a joint account to pay bills in a specific figure. And that's the extent of what they shared. And there's something about that weighs on a marriage, and it defeats it over time. So, even when I'm setting up a prenup that says, there's ways of keeping money separate, but there's also a really easy way of making community. And we have to give that path to make it easy. And I encourage people to invest in the community in some way, every year, every month, in some consistent way, because over time, when you just aren't forming financial community, it has a way of impacting the quality of the marriage.
So there's that honesty and openness and willing to collaborate to make it lasting.
Yeah, definitely. Just a way of just forming, putting money together in some way. Yeah, you have to do that. I think otherwise, I can just tell you, so often people tell me that they never, integrated their funds in any way. And they have no idea what the other person makes after 15 years. They have no idea.
Wow.
And it's so strange, and that just, you have to be willing to, join funds in some way.
Well, thank you so much for all of this. It was very insightful.
Yeah, my pleasure. And, again, I really encourage people to think about mediating a prenup or mediating a postnup. It can cost a little bit more money because you have 3 professionals. But collaborating and being very open and the dialogue can really, really benefit couples, long-term success. And so I'm a huge fan of mediating the premarital or postnuptial agreements, and people really feel very, very good about the process at the end of it, typically. So encourage people to try it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.